Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well, and I hope the morning has been great so far. I'm doing really well too, except for the fact that every time I see myself on a video, I feel I've been eating more and more sitting on my chair. Everything in life is great for me. Today, we'll be talking about how the world has changed and how we have actually come to a new normal and what lies beyond. Well, this is not new news. 2 years ago, around beginning of 2020, COVID-19 hit us in the middle of our eyes. It paralyzed our thought process. It paralyzed us physically. It basically put the whole world on a standstill. Some leaders call it the Great Recession. Some call it the Great Depression. Others like Fareed Zakaria call it the Great Paralysis. Well, it's very clear nobody is able to figure it out what exactly happened and how we were supposed to deal with it. When I was asked to speak with Nilesh on this topic, I went through the same experience. It was a complete roller coaster ride when I started reading and researching what we all went through. Well, you will see our presentation is no less. It is a roller coaster ride. Well, this is what happened to the stock market. It has never happened in the history that we know of before. Every major stock exchange fell by more than 25% points. The World Bank called it the steepest, the biggest downgrade recession since the 1990s. However, what you see is another interesting thing. The big fives, which always continue to grow, they actually anticipated a huge loss of more than 1.3 trillion in their market value. We were all so jittery, so nervous, and look what happened. Well, especially the developed countries fueled in a lot of money as fiscal stimulus. To be precise, more than 15 trillion was fueled in the economy by developed countries. And very interestingly, what you see on the left side of your screens is a remarkable recovery, a recovery which has not been seen in the global financial crisis, not been seen in 2001 or in 1950s. This is a K-shaped recovery due to the money that was fueled in. And more interestingly, from May 2020 come to November 2020, the big fives are growing again. They have made huge advances, market cap goes up, huge businesses, but there is another side of the story. Although the developed countries' recovery got a boost, developing countries were not keeping up with the pace. If you see the statistics on the bottom left of your slide, of your screen, what you would see is while the economic growth of the developed countries was high, the growth of developing countries not so much. They actually were anticipated to be 2% less than the expected growth. Similarly, the vaccine coverage was much higher for developed countries and less than 10% for low-income countries or developing countries. Well, along with this, there were some other changes happening as we transversed through the shock that we were experiencing. Digital transformation got an acceleration at not known before. If you see on the left, the data from Zinnov says that the acceleration was high even for companies for which core was not digital transformation. When I say that, I mean the ER&D spend of industries like automotive, pharmaceutical, healthcare, all of that went up and it's still accelerating. The whole world became a tele world in a pace not known before. 300 million people suddenly started working in 2020 from home. And this number is way higher now. 80% of students globally went to online education. Nobody could have ever imagined that we would have our kids every day while we work from home. They would be studying side by side. Telemedicine. There is a 1,500% increase in medical care done remotely as compared to 2018, just 2 years ago. Telejustice. Even the justice was provided remotely with more than 4.9 million judicial hearings in India done digitally. Who could have thought the entire justice system in India is going to go online? As you may have heard before, leaders like Satya Nadella acknowledged that they have done 2 years worth of digital transformation within 2 months. That is absolutely unimaginable, incredible. The minutes that people spent on Teams and the usability of Microsoft Teams went skyrocketing. Zoom's stock value increased by more than 300% within a year. There are other trends we saw. As the digital spend went up, the jobs which were related to remote work or in general related to technology started going up. What you see on the left side, there is a 40% growth in job postings, and there is an 80% growth in remote job postings. That is absolutely an incredible shift in a very short time period from December 20 to May 21. What you also see on the right side is data by Zinnov, which clearly tells us that although in 2020, where we all were facing the vulnerabilities and the mindset we were in, there was a dip in hiring. Everybody was trying to play cautious. But markets have opened up again, and there is a steep increase in the hiring trend in 2021 first half. 55% increase in hiring trend in ITES sector. Therefore, 10 million people will first time find job ever. While digitalization has primarily been for white collar jobs, do we anticipate a digital divide? Do we mean that because digitalization is going to be the key for future, we know that non-touch technologies will take a precedence? What does this mean for blue collar jobs? Yes, it could lead to great isolation. It could lead to diminished opportunities. But actually, on the flip side, as remote work becomes more common, as we all reverse migrate to our hometowns, there is an interesting trend that's emerging. And I actually observed this trend talking with one of my colleagues who is sitting in a small town in Kerala as we speak. Rohit Nair was helping me build this story. And while we were talking, I learned from him that although they don't have Swiggy available in their town, they have smaller apps which have experienced an immense boost in the delivery for food and groceries. What does this mean? This actually means for a digital app like Swiggy, etc., they employ delivery boys, they employ a delivery task force. That gives a huge boost to smaller town, blue collar job economy. And if the migration of talent continues, there'll be deurbanization, as Bari called out yesterday, and also there will be boost to different kind of blue collar jobs. Very interestingly, another trend, which was happening even before COVID, but COVID really profoundly accelerated it. The big tech companies just keep growing. Companies like Microsoft, Google, Apple, they have actually grown to the size of world economies. If you see the numbers here, Belgium's economy is 2.2 trillion. And the data you have is actually the values from February 2021. Facebook has actually already exceeded a 1 trillion value. Therefore, these companies have almost become size of countries and much bigger than many countries across the world. Well, what did they do? Digital markets are a true examples of winner takes it all economies. They have successfully leveraged network effects, switching cost, self-reinforcing advantages of data, and increasing returns to scale. It's a really great lesson that if they can do it, I think other companies in the world can do it. On the flip side, I would also like to call out, it has created a great amount of apprehension that does it mean there is too much power getting in hands of few big corporates? But, as history tells us, governments now are trying to enforce antitrust laws, etc. But as history tells us, it's been done with oil industry, it's been done with telecom industry. It is not very effective. In few decades, a new company emerges. Instead, the way the telecom sector was handled, where networks were opened, so now if our Google Map data can be exchanged in between companies, that gives the consumer the power and reduces the monopoly of one or two companies. Therefore, I leave it with you a thought. Think about, is antitrust laws the only way to go about this? Because these companies are also the biggest R&D spenders in the world. These companies are also the providers of information in every nook and corner of the world, which was unheard of a few decades ago. There's another interesting trend happening, which is Although there is an increasing jobs, there is increasing digital transformation, acceleration, but there is also increasing talent deficit. What you see on your map is a prediction in some of the industries by 2030. Deficit is the yellow, the golden yellow area, which you can see is very covering a very big part of that map. So, except for few countries like India, actually most part of the world would have deficit or a significant deficit, which is in deep orange shown on the map. With 4.3 million shortage of talent in technology, media, and telecom sector, we are going to be not realizing 449.7 billion worth of output. Do we really want to be in a world where, due to being in a certain geography, means we cannot leverage the technology acumen we have or the intellectual capabilities the talent across the globe has? There is another interesting trend that came through. With all the hiring that went up and remote work that went up, the talent deficit that keeps going up, attrition also went up. Now, is it a blip? Is it a blip because there is an immense amount of fiscal stimulus in the economy? Is it a blip because people are frustrated with the same job, with the same sitting in front of a screen and doing the same thing? This could be a pent up turnover demand because they want to change. They seek a change, they do a change, but the next change is also virtual. So although this could be a pent up turnover demand, this is also a result of exhaustion of digital overload. This is also a result of lack of connections between teams. Remote work has allowed them wider access to job pools. You will see when Nilesh speaks what has happened to the talent dynamics, competition dynamics due to all of this. Employees feel a bit disengaged from leadership, and what can we do about it? There is a whole plethora of influx of new jobs due to increased digital spend, as we said. Cognizant really acknowledged publicly that they have hit a 31% of attrition rate, completely unheard of in the past. And they're going to hire 100K lateral hires. That's one company's hiring demand. Now, there are several companies in countries like India, like Cognizant, and you can imagine the demand globally for talent. In the next session, I will pass on the baton to my colleague and my boss, Nilesh. How can we plan for the new normal? So over to you, Nilesh.
Thanks, Amita. So as Amita mentioned, that there's a tremendous increase in remote. We all are experiencing remote work, but now the people who are actually doing remote work have actually started liking the way they're working. They feel they're more productive. 63% of employees feel they're more productive with remote work. 70% of Indian employees want flexible remote work options. There are 5 times more remote job postings in India alone. And in the US, there are 1 million more job openings than people are looking for work. As you may already heard, there are a lot of companies like Slack, Dropbox, Twitter, LinkedIn, and I just read an article, TCS is also thinking about going completely remote. So this is something which all of us will have to think about. I know some of us believe that the serendipity of having people coming to work can lead to higher innovation, more collaboration. But this is also a reality which we need to think about. How are we going to, meet the needs of the employees while making the needs of the companies and figure out what is the best way to deal with this. A lot of companies are going to the hybrid model, which is probably going to be a standard, but some of these companies are going completely remote. And so that's something we need to think about. If we stick to the old ways of working, you may actually lose people. So that's something to think about. How do we, particularly in the knowledge industry, the finance, professional services industry, this is something we'll have to work towards get there. The next slide. The other interesting thing we are seeing here in the US, and also it obviously has similar implications world over, that now Silicon Valley companies are hiring talent all over the country. So that's creating pressure in the local tier 2 cities, where now I'm maybe sitting in Omaha, Nebraska, and suddenly I could be working for a Google or Microsoft or Facebook. So it has led to attrition in local companies and also increase the pay structures there. So similar things I expect to happen in India, where a lot of companies had opened up tier 2 centers, which now can tier one companies like big companies in Bangalore and Hyderabad and Pune could go ahead and hire people from the tier two cities of Coimbatore, Jaipur, Baroda, and several others. So you could see some attrition. So the advantage of being in a tier two city with lower attrition and lower cost would start to go away. So something to deal with also. So those advantages will disappear, like what we are already seeing in the US. So something to think about. How do we deal with that? And as we go along, we'll talk about some of the areas which you can deal with it. So go to the next slide. Obviously, remote working is something which we are kind of all forced to do, but there are a lot of interesting issues which you have to deal with. One is how do you be a compassionate leader while you are not able to meet your teams? How do you train people to effectively communicate? It's much easier when you have water cooler discussions or you're just meeting in an office to have a communication. But how do you be more effective while you're remotely communicating? Those are some of the skills which I think companies need to seriously think about. How do you train your leaders, your managers, and or your employees to be more effective in a remote environment? So Amita mentioned screen fatigue, I believe. How do you deal with those screen fatigue issues while also being effective? People like the productivity, they like the being with the family, like working from remote locations, but how do you make them more effective? So you may want to invest in remote communication tools, more effective tools. Obviously, a lot of companies have offered office equipment, dollars or rupees in India to be able to equip your own offices to be able to support that. But also you may want to do some training. As you'll see in the future slides, one of the other things which you have to deal with is change in speed and change in technology and the everything becoming tele and remote. How do you train your employees? So reskilling should be a pretty important part of what you do. And then obviously the one last part, which if you see the quote on the top, Humanize, it's a social sensing company, that the remote extended has increased the people's time at work by up to 20%, though it has led to reduced stress. I know some of us probably don't believe that, but it actually, being with family, being with your friends and working remotely. My son went to Hawaii for working for 6 weeks. So it helps you reduce the stress and the negative emotions which go with it. It also has increased confidence with people and their well-being. So there are some advantages. And also, surprisingly, it actually led to 40% increase in collaboration. All of these seems kind of counter to what we may be experiencing, but these are real data which they did. But it has definitely had some impact on work-life balance. From I know I do long meetings, and sometimes being on Zoom or Teams, you tend to lose sight of what are the work hours to what are your family time. So something to think about. How do you balance that? So helping your employees deal with those issues, training them, maybe something to think about of what kind of investments you need to make. So. One other interesting thing is a lot of women had to leave, or parents in general, but women in particular had to leave their jobs to support their children from working, schooling from home. But there's a positive part to this where now once the schools open up, and because remote is becoming a pretty accepted way of working, some of these women who can now, more women may be able to join the workforce, which can lead to dealing with some of the talent wars which you are facing. So having a clear plan of making your workplace favorable to the women employees, having a diversity plan, which is strong diversity plan in place, can help you deal with some of the talent issues which we may all be facing right now. So there may be a positive aspect to this, that more women will be entering the workforce once the COVID is past due and children start going back to school. So that's something to think about. How do you leverage that into your game plan? So, obviously, we all have experienced this, that everything we do is online now. In fact, John Chambers, he said, 40% of all businesses will die in the next 10 years if they don't figure out how do you make your company digital. Today, I have an expectation of everything I do that there has to be an online way of doing it, and most consumers feel that way. Obviously, we've seen tremendous growth in online services. So think about how do you make your businesses and everything. You almost think about, like when we first started with mobile, we started mobile first. Think about how do you go digital first. Everything you start with, think about how are you going to make whatever services you're offering into a digital offering to start with. And that's something which consumers and customers will expect, and something which we should be ready to provide. So some examples, as I'll show you. So Chipotle, it's a burrito company, as some of you may know. It's a Mexican restaurant. They had 49% of their sales now are digital sales. This is even during when the things have started to open up in the US. The digital sales continue to grow faster than their restaurant sales. And now they're actually opening up 200 different stores, digital only stores in the US. So a restaurant which was completely non-digital has completely become a digital store, a digital restaurant. And you can see that their sales, they just increased their sales by 31% last quarter, with the digital sales going up 49%, 49% of the total sales being digital. And similarly, you can see Starbucks. Every business which was ahead of the curve in digital has done really, really well. Starbucks, Domino's Pizza, Chipotle, some of examples which have really done well. But this is also true in enterprise offerings, where companies which are digital first have done really, really well as compared to companies which have not been able to deal with that. So another big aspect of what we need to do as a business is being able to change and change fast. As Pari mentioned during his talk yesterday, that things which used to take 15 to 18 months, now companies are doing it in 3 months. Microsoft Teams, did 9 releases prior in a year before COVID, did 63 releases since COVID, right? And so the same thing, Airbnb, their sales dropped by 67% due to COVID, because obviously travel is the most impacted business. But because of the change they made, they're able to see a 300% increase in revenue. Obviously, some of that is because the travel came back, but some of them also the way they were able to change very quickly. They were able to offer, people are yearning for travel, so they were able to offer offerings where their customer did not have to provide a location. They just provided ideas of where to go. They also made staycations a more prominent part of their offerings. And so now their sales are actually higher than they were in 2019. So a business which was able to adapt quickly and change fast was able to now come out of this much stronger than they were before. Obviously, another key macro trend is companies are going global for talent. You can see here the distribution of talent, software talent across the globe. Obviously, a lot of the talent is in India, as you all already know, but also other regions of the world. Latin America, Eastern and Central Europe are another source of talent. So companies we have seen at Zinnov, we continue to see this accelerating trend towards global talent. So something to think about, how are you going to leverage global talent? And even companies within India, we are finding they're now looking at Eastern Europe and Central Europe for specific talent. So it's not only everything going east, there are some things which going from east to west, depending on the kind of talent you're looking for. So next slide. Yeah, and then there are about 10,500 centers. These are centers which have more than 50 people, employees across the globe. But now there is a next trend to this, where there may not be even a center. We call the global centers of excellence. The next phase to that is virtual centers of excellence, so VCoEs as we call them. So every company would probably have in the next few years a completely virtual CoE. That's a trend we are going to start seeing. Remote is the next phase of the remote work, which you can see. So how do you navigate to the new normal? First, figure out how do you going to leverage talent globally. You don't have to be restricted to the talent in your own regions. Allow employees to work remotely. That way you can increase their addressable market for talent, and also gives the employees what they are looking for. Clearly, we talked about diversity, figure out how there may be more women entering the workforce because of the remote and global talent avenues. How do you leverage that diversity and leverage the women workforce for greater to address the talent wars we are facing? And obviously, the thing which is all of this is required to be digital first. So how do we get there? And to get to digital first, how do you do the reskilling? And probably the most important part is you really need to be able to change quickly and at a tremendous speed. So in everything that you do has to be 5 times faster than you were doing it before. So how do you train your people to collaborate faster, to execute faster, to change faster? So that's how you're going to be able to deal with the new normals which you're facing in the industry today. So thank you all, and looking forward to your feedback on this session.